Hello, everyone. Uh, Welcome to session 7 of the Community of Practice on using a public health approach in communities to build population-level mental wellness and resilience for the climate ecosystem biodiversity catastrophe. As before, and I always want to do, I want to thank all of the co-sponsors or organizational co-sponsors for supporting this initiative. You can see all the folks there. And I just want to reiterate our key message that is going to be more and more important, I think, as time goes on, and that is that community is our medicine. Because we know that throughout history, it's when humans have banded together that they've been able to come up with creative, adaptive solutions to complex problems. And we can do this again now if we work at the community level. And the desire for community connections is greater than almost any time in my lifetime. And I certainly think many people feel the same way. So we've got to continually remember that if trauma can be passed down through generations, and so can healing and transformational resilience. That's what we're trying to do. So just a summary of what we talked about last week. I like to try to just make sure everybody remembers what we're doing. We talked about different ways to build universal literacy about mental wellness and resilience. And again, literacy follows from health literacy, but this is on mental health and resilience. And it involves, in one way to think about it, involves sort of three core components, in simple, age, and culturally appropriate ways, accountable ways, help everyone become trauma informed, learn how trauma and toxic stress can affect their mind, body, emotions, and behaviors, and the actions of groups, learn presencing or self-regulation and co-regulation skills, and purposing or adversity-based growth skills. And I heard some feedback that talking about the end of the world, so to speak, can activate people. That's what those presencing and purposing skills are. So when you feel that really distressed, try to go back and calm your nervous system with a particular presencing skill that makes sense to you, that helps you. So helping people understand how trauma and toxic stress can affect them, their mind, body, and behavior, and groups, helps normalize feelings and prevent self-harm and social harm. That is to say, there's nothing wrong with you. You're having a natural reactive response to the sense of a threat. The question is, how can you calm your nervous system and come back into a place of self-regulation? And learning purposing and presencing skills also gives people confidence and peace of mind that they can manage their emotions in any situation and find new meaning, direction, and hope in those situations. But it's best to do this, always required to do it in a just and equitable way, and best to do it in community and group settings as much as possible, because that provides the emotional support, sense of solidarity that really is important to build those a sense of self-regulation and adversity-based growth skills. And it also helps people overcome fears of being stigmatized if they acknowledge that they feel distress. So the more you can engage with and help your communities and neighborhoods engage together in these activities, the better. So today we're going to focus on the fourth foundational area our research identified is going to be critical for the climate ecosystem biodiversity catastrophe, and that is to continually engage residents in very specific types of practices that research and experience shows can grow and sustain mental wellness and transformational resilience. And we're honored to have two really outstanding speakers with us here today. Reverend Paul Abernathy, who's the CEO of the Neighborhood Resilience Project in Pittsburgh, and James Baraz, who is the founder of Awakening Joy, and I'll do more introduction about them with them in a few minutes. I just want to go through a couple other things before we hear from the two speakers, and one is just to share that we're starting to see more and more research on the climate ecosystem biodiversity catastrophe, the mental health impacts. And what's really helpful is that although disasters capture our attention, as we've emphasized, it's really those toxic stresses, those relentless stresses generated by the breakdown of the core systems people rely on for basic needs that are an equal or a greater impact than disasters. And research is finally starting to show this. So here's just 3 new research things. And I don't look for these. People send these to me. It's really interesting. So climate change is already and will increasingly cause food prices to rise. And this is a story on the mental health impacts of that, the stresses. And you can, when you get the slides, you can hit that link. There's another story about how wildfire smoke events accelerated mental health issues that caused hospital emergency room visits. And there's a study in France that somebody actually just sent me this morning that heat waves are causing mental health issues there, and it's creating basically a national emergency when they have those heat waves in France. So we're seeing more and more that. I just want to point that out, that it's becoming clearer as researchers start diving into that. And it makes purposing, both presencing and purposing, but purposing, which is what we're focused on now, even more important. And it's about living out our values that we really hold dear in the midst of adversities. And by values, what I mean, and I think what we all mean, is actions, not ideals or morals or goals. Values are how you act in life, not what you think about or believe in, but don't actually act on. And acting on our values is what allows us to live with dignity, meaning, and purpose. So let's start with just a brief resilience pause. And as we've said in the past, if it resonates with you, you can use the skylight method. If it doesn't resonate with you, that's okay. You can use another method. And that means just to sort of observe yourself objectively by looking down as if you're looking through a skylight in a roof at yourself, at this person, and just notice what you're experiencing now in your body, in your mind, or your emotions. So you've got some pain, some tingling, some warmth, heat in your body. Is your mind racing? Is it calm? Are you feeling distressed? Are you feeling peaceful? Just sort of notice that for a second. And then let's just practice one other kind of purposing skill, and that's living out our values. And one way to do that is see if you can bring to mind a role model or a mentor that you might have who consistently shows you a way to think and act wisely in adversities. And it could be a real or imagined role model or mentor. It could be somebody you know, a friend, coach you had, somebody you see. Could be a religious figure, or it could be something that's imagined, that you say, well, I can imagine this person and they always sort of show me the right way to think and act. Just see if you can bring to mind some type of role model or mentor. And as you do that, now identify a distressing experience you had in the past few months. Could be an experience with your family, spouse, or significant other, or work, or any kind of distressing experience. Could be hearing about climate change and getting distressed. And now looking back at that experience, can you imagine how your role model or mentor would have responded to that event? What would they have done? Somebody who's really showing you how to think and act wisely. How would they have responded to that distressing information or experience you had? And then ask yourself, did you respond that way? And if not, what would it take to respond in a similar way in a future event, something similar to that? And what you're doing through this kind of exercise is projecting your core values out there and trying to sort of say, how do I live closer? And living out our core values is always a process. None of us are perfect. We're always going to struggle in some ways, but the more you can keep that role model, that mentor idea out there, vision, that image, and then think about how can I move in that direction, the more you might be able to actually live in a way that is in accordance with your core values. So with that, let's do a breakout session. And Jesse's going to post these in chat for you, but let's just, again, in one word, just how do you feel right now? What's going on with you? Did you practice any purposing skills last week and teach them to others? If so, how did it go? What stood out from you about Charlotte, yours and Dr. Wanderboon's presentations about how they help people become trauma and resilience informed, how they build universal literacy, if you will? And did you share that information with anyone that you're talking with about forming a resilience coordinating network or expanding in a different one? And if so, how did it go? And did you decide that there's a way to engage residents in building universal literacy? So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Jesse, and he's going to have you join some breakout rooms, and we'll see you in 10 minutes.
Thanks, Bob. Everyone should be getting notice for the breakout rooms right now. See you all back here soon.
Well, welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a good time to good conversations. If you have any comments, any key questions that came up, any concerns, please post them in chat. We'll try to get to them at the question and answer at the end of the session, if you will. I just want to go very quickly through what we've been doing so far to bring everybody back up to speed, to remind everybody. After the initial overview, the first session, we talked about what is the climate ecosystem biodiversity catastrophe and what's going on. The very first session, we talked about how to form and organize and operate a resilience coordinating network or council. Becky Turner talked about how they did it in Walla Walla. Mebane Boyd talked about the 50 now coordinating networks they have in North Carolina, how they came together. Then with the next week after that, we talked about how to begin building community capacity for mental wellness and resilience. And one is to help people begin to heal their traumas. And another is to develop asset maps, engage residents in doing that kind of work. And Matt Erb from the Center for Mind Body Medicine and Graham Parker from the Rural Opportunity Institute talked about how they help people do that. In the three previous sessions to this one, first we talked about how to build social connections across boundaries. Robin Sanger talked about how they do that in Peace for Tarpon, but also Howard Lawrence wasn't able to join us. But I briefly gave a sense of how they do it neighborhood to neighborhood. We then talked about really creating supportive physical, built, economic, and ecological conditions. Ruben Cantu and Tamira Jones talked about how they did that. And then last week, we talked about developing universal literacy, mental health literacy, essentially, help everyone become trauma and resilience informed. And you heard from Charlotte Ure and Dr. Wanderboon about that. Today, we're going to focus on how to actually engage residents in specific types of activities that help them prevent and heal their traumas. And the next 2 weeks, the next week after that, we're going to talk about how to establish ongoing healing opportunities. In the last two sessions, we'll go into how to really continue this. And again, just like all the other sessions, engaging residents in activities that promote and help heal and sustain mental wellness and resilience really should be connected with all the other 5 elements. It should be a standalone focus, but it should be woven into the other 5. So again, today we're going to focus on how to engage residents in specific types of activities that the experience and research shows builds mental wellness and resilience. And if you're using a public health approach to prevent mental health and psychosocial problems, you want to engage with ongoing systemic actions that transform norms, attitudes, behaviors, and habits. When you do that, you want to connect this with the other 4 areas we've talked about. And the goal is here to shift people's attention from distress and anger and hopelessness to factors that actually enhance their sense of wellness and resilience and healthy hope. And as all the other actions we've been talking about, they're most powerful done at the community level, at the grassroots level with others. And I just want to quickly go through, we identified 6 specific practices. There are undoubtedly others, but the research we looked at said these were really the key. They stood out more than others. One is to help people laugh often. In the midst of adversities, it helps to laugh. It releases the trauma and stuck in the nervous system, the distress, et cetera. And there's so many examples of how you can do this in your neighborhood or community. Victoria, Canada, there's a neighborhood resilience project there. They realized the neighbors were distressed by the extreme smoke events and other extremes that were going on. And the neighbors came together and created this laughing aloud guide to making physical comedy in their neighborhoods. And people get together now and do a comedy show for the rest of the neighbors using the guide. And it's really powerful. You can get it on their website. But Glow Clowns also trains people on how to do therapeutic comedy in communities. And you can go out and ask them to come to your community. Practicing forgiveness is another one. There's community forgiveness campaigns by a number of different organizations that you could look at. And forgiveness is critical because many people, when they're stressed or traumatized, do things that harm others, and you want to be able to forgive that. That doesn't mean let them off the hook for what they've done, but it does mean sort of it's for you. And just as importantly, when you're stressed, you're likely to do things that you don't feel good about in terms of what you say, what you do. So you want to practice forgiveness for yourself. But at the same time, we also want to help people keep learning. We got to learn a lot of new things at the community level to deal with the climate emergency. And so we want to keep learning. And when we go into a traumatized, stressed position, we withdraw into a self-protective survival mode, which often makes us uninterested in new things. So we want to keep people learning. UNESCO has a global network of learning cities, and the Rural Opportunity Institute, their systems mapping to learn about trauma are good examples of how to do that. Being grateful is another really vital skill. James and Father Paul may talk about those both, but and there's attitude of gratitude campaigns going on. The Newport News on the East Coast of the U.S., for instance, Say Something Nice Day is now actually national in the U.S., but nope, it's not very well known. Most people don't know it. Helping people care for their body is another vital one. Providing food, clothing, healthcare, shelter programs. Many organizations who do this. This is really a starting point. If people don't have sufficient food, clothing, shelter, et cetera, or healthcare, it's very hard to help them find hope. And there's also play streets that have been developed, and that is when cities shut down whole streets to allow kids mostly to come out and play basketball or do soccer or do physical activities. It's really a way to help them in a safe and just and equitable way to get care for their body and find simple joys. And we're going to hear more about this in a second, but that is, you got to find joy in life for what you already have and what's there. And there's Action for Happiness campaigns in the UK that are doing this kind of work. There's Spread Joy through community art that's going on in Missouri. There's many other ways, and you're going to hear a little bit more about all of this in a second. So with that, I want to introduce Father Paul Abernathy, who is founder and CEO of the Neighborhood Resilience Project in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and doing some of the most interesting work I've seen, and just a wonderful work with people that we want you to hear about. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Father Paul.
Thank you so much, Bob. And I'm sorry, hit the wrong button. Screen share is what one. Okay. All right. It's so good to be with everyone here today. And certainly, Bob, I just want to say thank you. I'm always honored and inspired to be in your presence, and so grateful for all of the work that you truly are doing. My dear friend, Jesse, It's just always such a joy to be with you and all the rest of you. It's truly a pleasure and an honor to make your acquaintance. As Bob mentioned, I'm Father Paul Abernathy. I am the Chief Executive Officer of the Neighborhood Resilience Project. We're located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and we are a faith-based organization. The primary objective that we're really looking at is how we help transition from a trauma-affected community to a resilient, healing, and healthy community. And what I'm going to do right now is introduce for us this understanding of trauma-affected community. It's important to understand as it pertains to climate change and the impact of climate change on various communities that it does not hit every community the same way. There are some communities that have less resilience than others. And herein, I'd like to introduce the concept of community trauma. Now, we know that there is trauma in every community, but having said that, there are some communities that have been through more trauma than others. We're talking about communities that have been marginalized. We're talking about communities that have experienced historical trauma. We're talking about communities that have now continued disproportionate experience of trauma. And what do we mean by trauma? Gun violence is a form of trauma, poverty, addiction, homelessness, racism, abuse, neglect. These are forms of trauma. And what we have found in our research is that there are some communities that have higher experiences of trauma, in particular experiences of childhood trauma. And these experiences of trauma, often in a historical context, have reduced the resilience that whole communities are able to display in the face of the most significant challenges that happen to us as a result of climate change. So it is the work of the Neighborhood Resilience Project to really look at this, to really wrestle with this notion of trauma-affected community, this concept of communities where trauma is so widespread. Trauma serves as the worldview for which, through the trauma serves as the lens through which these communities see the world. This notion that Bob mentioned about new learning and people in survival mode being very often unable to embark on new learning, this is very much a symptom of trauma-affected community. If Robert Wood Johnson talks about a culture of health, then we have also to understand that the antithesis is true. Cultures where trauma is the norm that reinforces cultural norms that result in unhealthy lifestyles, cultural norms that reduce resilience in community. So our work is then how we get from trauma-affected community to resilient, healing, and healthy community. And you'll note by our vision statement is how we are talking about people themselves being raised up from the ashes of trauma. And this is where we acknowledge that in order for us to make this transition, the people themselves have got to become empowered healers. The people themselves have got to become community builders. The people themselves have got to become positive change makers. We reference the civil rights movement, as you'll see in our mission statement, and it's important to understand that the advances that we made in the United States in the 1950s and 60s were not simply organic. They were not by accident. They were not accidental advancements. There was a vast network of well-established training and infrastructure that raised up a generation of empowered healers, community builders, and positive change makers. So we understand if we're talking about building resilience in communities that have been inundated with trauma for many generations, that we too need the same kind of infrastructure. We do this really by advancing this work of trauma-informed community development. And it's important to understand that people talk a lot about community development. We're talking about this community development as a process that results in community well-being that's facilitated in this context in a trauma-informed way. We can't just have meetings and hope people show up to the meetings. That is always a recipe for failure. But the question rather is, how prepared are we to engage people who are suffering in crisis, address the crisis, then embark with them on a process that is trauma-informed, healing-centered, that give them the opportunity to discover their voice and then empower their voice by bringing to them resources, knowledge, expertise that enable them to be the leaders that they truly have the potential to be. You'll see that we have a variety of interventions across 3 areas: community support, health and well-being, leadership development. Of course, as it pertains to community support, this is where we're acknowledging that people they are still living in active trauma in a very broad way in community. So how we're able to really address people living in that trauma by reducing strain is very important. People who they might have some kind of symptomatic depression, but we know that the source of that depression is they're maybe having trouble paying their bills. So we have to acknowledge we have to pay those bills in order to reduce that strain to help alleviate the stress of that person. Of course, as we engage with people in crisis, working to reduce strain, that's when we can begin to do this more healing-centered work, building well-being. And for us, this is where we have community-based interventions, where we have what we call behavioral health community organizers that really go out into communities, and not only in the entire community, we're really focused on areas of the community that we have a data analysis to show there's concentrated challenge. So if you take any neighborhood, there's going to be some corners of that neighborhood that have greater trauma, greater challenges than others, where we have concentrated challenge in even some corners of the neighborhood. This is where we are focusing just very strategically on these areas with intervention processes, community-based intervention processes that are essentially year-long intervention strategies that are working to build a culture of health, work to reimagine environment, work to establish greater connection, work to build resilience, and thus achieve well-being in these areas. Of course, we have to address the trauma that they're experiencing also in the short term, and you'll see we have a trauma response team that responds to homicides as a result of gun violence that's staffed primarily by volunteers, although we do have now a robust staff that helps lead that initiative. We have to make sure we have a safety net for healthcare. In addition to that, primary, behavioral, and dental care, as well as we are working with community health workers and community health deputies to develop strategies addressing social determinants of health to reduce the death gap, which leads us to the final point. Is as we're working on all of that, the question that we are asking ourselves is how are we intentionally developing leadership? And so we have leadership development initiatives that we're doing in community and with community groups around the United States at this point to help facilitate the skill building exercises so that people are able then to do this work to be leaders in building resilient, healing, and healthy community in their own communities. We have work that we're doing with different groups around the country, and you'll see that these are some examples of cohorts from different cities in the United States, different regions in the United States, who we've partnered with, who have been working to learn some of the elements of trauma-informed community development as we understand it. We're very excited that we have a health assessment system that we've designed with the University of Pittsburgh called I Am Healthy that gives us the ability to take an integrated perspective on health, well-being, and resilience in community and measure the health of the person, the household, the block, and ultimately the neighborhood, and demonstrate as a result of interventions that we have increased resilience, increased well-being, and thus what we're starting to see now over time is a significant decrease in the utilization of social services, which is an indication, of course, that we are building resilience in these broader communities. It is a great joy to be with all of you here today, and we certainly look forward to joining you for the Q&A portion of today's session.
Thank you, Father Paul. Yeah, I always wish we had 3 hours to hear all the details, but we'll come back and ask a bunch of questions if that's okay. I want to now introduce James Baraz, and I hope I got that right, James. He's the creator and teacher of Awakening Joy, a really exciting program. He's also the co-founder of the Spirit Rock Meditation Center. He's co-founding teacher at Spirit Rock in California, Woodfield, California. He's a guiding teacher for One Earth Sangha, which is a virtual eco-dharma center devoted to Buddhist or mindful responses to climate change. And he's organized many climate days at Spirit Rock Meditation Center. James and I have known each other for since the mid-'80s when I first attended a meditation session that he workshop that he offered, and have been to work together off and on ever since. James, thank you for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here and support the amazing work that you're doing, Bob. And I was really inspired by what you shared, Father Paul. And I'll share a few things that that I found helpful and that Bob wanted me to talk about. I was so glad to see that joys is one of the pie segments on the pie, and I first got into this work when and particularly connecting it with joy a number of years ago when I first started getting the climate catastrophe, started to really comprehend it. And I spoke to a friend, a meditative friend who happened to be the manager of the World Wildlife Fund climate project. And I said, Lou, I've just been teaching meditation, mindfulness meditation, and awakening joy. And now I get it. What can I do? And he looked at me and he said, James, joy might be one of the most important things we need to remember. And I said, oh, okay, I can do that. And that's been my marriage of those two passions for a number of years now. And I want to share a little bit about why joy and some very basic principles that I share about. You could read more about it in my book, Awakening Joy. All the states of well-being are expansive states. Love, caring, peace, generosity. They're states of opening. And all the states of dysregulation are contracting states. Fear, worry, confusion, dysregulation. Our bodies and our minds and our hearts are closed and tight and or agitated. And when we're in that space, we can't act and think clearly and skillfully. So the more we can open up to an expansive state, the more clarity we have, the more space we have for the difficulties that we're going through, the more balance, the wiser our actions, and also we affect everybody around us when we have at least some access to some well-being. So it might seem like a contradictory idea, oh, joy in the midst of catastrophe. And so first, to shift the word joy to any state of well-being, because sometimes joy can trip the mind up. What do you mean joy? I'll just take not being miserable. I say, well, start there. Start with not being miserable. Okay, good. But any state of ease, balance, and connection will support you and everyone around you. The principles of awakening joy are based on the fact that when you are experiencing a moment of well-being, when you are mindful of it, it deepens it tremendously. So it's one thing to know, oh, I'm feeling pretty good right now. It's a whole other to know, oh, this is what it feels like to feel good. And my neuroscience friend Rick Hansen says, if you are with a state of well-being for 15 seconds, here's a little practice for you, 6 times in a day, that's 90 seconds of well-being if you can handle it. You do that over a 2-week period and you will start to both deepen your neural pathways and you'll start to be on the lookout for the good. So with that in mind, I want to share with you 10 states and these themes of what I call awakening joy that you might just practice and see if they're beneficial. First one is intention, to incline your mind towards well-being, happiness, or joy. Invite it, allow it, and recognize it when it's here. Mostly, we are inclined towards what can go wrong. And if you start to notice what's right or what's good in this moment, your mind changes that negativity bias to be on the lookout for well-being. Even in times of crisis, when there's people helping each other, it can be, we've all been so inspired by that. Mindfulness is the next. In mindfulness, as I said before, when we're present for what's actually happening, we are connected. And when we're present for a moment of well-being, it deepens it. A simple way that mindfulness regulates Just try this right now. People say, what is mindfulness? What is mindfulness? Just try this. This will just take a few moments. Put your hand out in front of you right now. Okay? Go ahead, try it. Everyone, move your hand slowly back and forth. Slowly. Close your eyes and put all your attention on feeling your hand moving right now. As you're doing this, is there any worry? Is there any fear? Is there any story about what's going to happen that's so terrible? No. When you're mindful, you are connected with the moment and you're not spinning the stories about what will happen and fear. So there's refuge in the present moment. Gratitude, as was mentioned, that's one of the pieces of the pie, to consciously reflect on all the blessings in your life. Even when you're going through a hard time, it's possible to notice all the good, even the fact that you're alive and with others, and we need others when we're going through our dysregulation. I have some friends, I have some support, I'm alive and I'm breathing. Gratitude, and when you are in touch with gratitude, if you can feel it in your body, it's that much more powerful. The fourth of these principles is opening to life's difficulties. This is not just skipping through fields of daisies and saying, aren't we happy? But to learn how to open them with kindness and compassion and patience. When you're going through a difficult period, you want to honor your grief or your fear and be right where you are, but to remember that you're not alone and that this is part of life. We're all given to our share of sorrows, and we have practices, mindful self-compassion or mindful noticing, being with the feelings that are essential to go through the difficult stuff. Acting with integrity, to consciously stay in touch with how good it feels to make wise choices aligned with your highest values. The joy of what I call the joy of letting go of your stories of what might happen, your expectations, or I know where this is going, or the imagined control that you have that you never really had. You have some input, but you can't control situations. And the more you can let go, the more you can be present in a wise way. And the most joyful expression of letting go is cultivating generosity. I'll just quickly go through learning to love ourselves. This is a key piece to make good friends with yourself and appreciate who you are. Then all of your beautiful qualities can shine through. And that leads to the joy of connection that Father Paul and Bob have been talking about so beautifully. When we feel connected, our love comes out and we want to make a difference in the world, and we realize we're not alone, which leads to compassionate action. In that compassionate action, we find ways to relieve the suffering around us, and without needing to fix everyone, to just be a caring presence is tremendously valuable, and doing what you can when you can. And finally, the joy of being. That is, if it's possible at times to get out of the doing mode and open to the joy of just relaxing and being present and knowing you're alive, and you will naturally be more harmonious with your life, and you'll be able to respond in a much more effective way. So I'll stop here, and that's a quick way to go through a 5-month course, but I hope some of it lands for you, and carry on with your good work.
Thank you, James, very much. Appreciate that. If you want to now put some questions for either Father Paul or James or both in chat, and Jesse will read them to you, read them out, and we'll start asking those. But while you're doing that, I'm going to ask a few questions. We were joking behind the scenes, oh, I'll try to ask tough questions. And they said, really? Do we have to have tough questions? But so I'll ask an easy one. How to both of you, maybe Father Paul, you can start. How do you get residents engaged in your project? How do you encourage them when they might be suspicious or don't know you? how does that happen?
Oh, this is a great question, Bob. And to this, I would say we have to really begin by speaking to people's needs. I mean, if people are in crisis, I remember one time we were having a conversation with a woman who it was about community development. She was a single mother. She was working. She owned her house, but she was just making enough to get by. And it was February in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where we are. And she was wearing a jacket when she answered the door. The reason being is because her furnace had died and she was cold in the house, her and her son. And I will tell you, in that moment, years ago, I learned that to that woman, community development was a new furnace. I mean, there's what sense in there is talking about these lofty ideas about the future when she is in the midst of her own suffering. And the first question is always that we ask is, how can we really alleviate strain in the moment? How can we really help offer people comfort and display compassion in the moment? And very often there's low-hanging fruit. And once we do that, I will tell you this, there's a whole difference between saying, I hear you, and then showing someone that we hear them by bringing resources to address a need that they shared with us. And that's always been a key element of our strategy.
Thank you. That bringing those resources to people is just obviously critical. James, let me ask you a question. So can you give an example of a group or an individual who has gone through your 10-week program, and what the benefits have been? What have they said about the outcomes? James, you're on chat.
You're on mute.
Yeah, you're on mute.
Sorry. Before we do, is it okay to take off the screen share so we could see everyone? I don't know if we're.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Great to see everyone. I've been teaching the course for over 20 years, and I continually get deep appreciation for how this affects people, because it doesn't just affect, as I said, it doesn't just affect you, it affects everybody around you when you are more in touch with your own well-being. People, just like when you're around somebody who's dysregulated or anxious, you might feel compassion for them, but it's not relaxing for you. When you're around somebody who is calmer and centered and loving and present, it affects you, doesn't it? And that's how it works. So your own well-being calms other people and in a very powerful way. And another thing that can say, there's this phenomenon called the elevation response by Jonathan Haidt, psychologist. When we see people acting in noble ways, it ennobles us as well. And so the more we are centered within ourselves and enjoy that feeling of compassionate action, the more it inspires others to do the same. You affect everyone around you.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Jesse?
that, James. Yeah, we've gotten a few good questions in the chat, and I know that we've only got a little bit around 5 minutes. So, Father Paul, could you share a little bit more about your micro community intervention examples?
So this is an important, we've learned this to be a very important strategy. And there was a governor previously that we had in the state of Pennsylvania years ago, and I don't know if anyone had ever heard this. He used to talk about the quote unquote tyranny of the zip code. And that is to say that in the United States, there are particular zip codes that if you come from, you're working at disadvantage, and people will mean different things by disadvantage. We're talking about lower life expectancy, maybe greater likelihood that you're going to have challenges with employment, or whatever, the whole host of things. And when we started to do this work in community, we found that was very misleading, because I live in one such community. And if you come to the block where I live, you will find they're homeowners. We've got families there. We've got this great sense of community. It's the most wonderful place I've ever lived in my life. And the entire community is not that way. And in fact, some research from the University of Pennsylvania had validated, that was conducted in Philadelphia, that it wasn't the zip code, but rather it was the block that was the highest determinant of health and well-being. And people in our community had been saying that to us for a period of time. When we learned that, we understood that we needed to develop an intervention process that was very, very strategic, because we have limited time, we have limited resources, and if we really know where some of the challenges are, we can really focus on that. And it's moreover, it's important to understand that when we look at community organizing, the Saul Alinsky style of community organizing, we have often found to be counterproductive in community, because there's this emphasis on the importance of agitation. So whenever you have people, it's funny when James is talking about, and Bob, we're talking about things like peace, we're talking about forgiveness. These are the things that build well-being. Agitation is kind of the antithesis of that. And sometimes we have communities with high experiences of trauma where people are professionally trained to agitate. And it really triggers time and time again and makes it nearly impossible to build resilience in community. And we realized that we had to change the way organizers were trained. And that was the origin of that. And so we have organizers that are essentially trained to conduct these year-long interventions, really focusing on these micro communities where we're taking a post assessment of resilience, health and well-being, or excuse me, a pre-assessment of resilience, health and well-being, and then a post assessment of resilience, health and well-being for the person, the household, the block, and then ultimately how that impacts the broader neighborhood. And of course, what are those interventions working to do? They're working to increase connectivity. They're working to improve physical health, obviously building people's capacity for their own mental health and well-being. We promote spiritual well-being as a component of resilience, relational health as a component of resilience. And what we found in our work as we've studied this over the years is that it makes an extraordinary impact. If we get people to do this so often as individuals working against the culture of a community, because what I want to emphasize is that there is a culture in these communities that's informed first and foremost by trauma. And sometimes we're asking people not just to make healthy choices, we're asking them to go against the culture of that community. Working collectively, establishing connections around a common goal of building resilience and improving well-being creates also a culture that reinforces healthy lifestyles. Now we're starting to realize this culture of health on a micro level that begins to impact the culture of health in the broader neighborhood. And we're starting to see some really favorable results from this.
Thanks so much, Father Paul, for all of that. We're going to go a little bit past the hour, if that's okay with both of you, James and Father Paul, just because there were a lot of questions. Won't be able to get to all of them. We will ask the questions that we didn't get to and follow up as we've done in the past. But one more question for each of you. James, can you speak a little bit more to how you integrate hope into your work?
Hope. It's such a tricky word. I like Joanna Macy's definition of hope. Joanna Macy, who's been an inspiration and a friend for many years. She's going to be 95 next month. And she said she used to hate the word hope because it just seemed like pie in the sky kind of a thing. And, oh, I hope this doesn't happen, or I hope this does happen. And I agree with her when she wrote a book actually called Active Hope, because she realized she had to reframe that. And active hope is having a vision of what you want to bring about, because everything starts with a visioning and a positive intention. And for me, I think it's really essential to have that possibility, a positive vision of even the best case scenario in the next 20, 30, 40 years. And to do your part to bring that about without getting attached to the results. Just knowing you're doing what you can and feeling good about your participation in it, because if you are in the present moment with that positive vision, you will more likely be coming from an inspired engagement that is saying, oh, I'm doing something. One of my inspiring teachers, Angeles Arian, says, action absorbs anxiety. And so when you are engaged and you're absorbing your anxiety and your fear or your outrage or whatever, and then you are moving towards a vision that inspires you, that's, again, very inspiring for others and contagious for others. So hope has that combination of vision and being present without being attached to the results. That's for me how it works.
Thanks so much, James. And then Father Paul, last question here. Is there a framework, or can you speak to your framework for developing community health deputies or the specialists that you work on? Someone asked if you could share a little bit more about that.
Yes, so we do have community health deputies. We have also community health workers. And now here's where I'm going to distinguish between the two, especially as it pertains to building resilience in community, because there's been this tremendous push, rightfully so, towards community health workers. I want to tell you that years ago, we had community health workers, and we were not sole pioneers in this, but there were many community-based organizations who were doing this kind of work. And what has happened since then, and in some respects, it's a positive development with a sort of negative consequence, is that there's been this emphasis to get community health workers formally certified. Here in Pennsylvania, that certification happens at the state level. And what has happened is that in the early days of community health workers, we had community members who were being broadly engaged in this and being brought in to do public health work in a very grassroots way. Slowly, many of them were sort of sifted out by this really formal certification process. And what we learned during COVID, and if any of you have ever seen the HBO documentary, How to Survive a Pandemic, it highlights this work to a degree. But what we learned during COVID is that we had to very rapidly create, at a grassroots level, a very robust public health workforce. And we also learned that we didn't need the same level of knowledge, the same level of skill that now we are requiring from our community health workers. And forgive me for giving such a poor example. This is a very, very poor example. But I grew up with my grandfather watching the old Western movies, and the bank robbers would come in, they'd rob the town, and then the sheriff would come and deputize a posse who were just guys he grabbed from the town to go after the bank robbers. And it's kind of that way. The question that we asked ourselves is, how do we create a formal process to deputize community leaders, opinion leaders, social influencers to actually do public health work? And that's why we still have formally certified community health workers. We also have a formal process to deputize community influencers to advance public health strategies. And what we're working really specifically to do with these community health deputies is to reduce the death gap. They're working on social determinants of health. There are different ways to measure the success of that. But what we want to see over time is that the communities that have a much lower life expectancy than communities that are in the same region, we want to measure the impact of these community health deputies on reducing that death gap, raising the life expectancy. And in this, we're still working to, I would say, get some of the broader public health system, if there is such a thing in the United States, formally, whatever that means. We're still trying to get them to fully understand that. I don't think they do, but I will say that this is, I believe, a strong a strategy that can greatly enhance community resilience, especially as it pertains to public health work and community.
Father Paul, thank you so much for that very insightful information. And I think we're even seeing in chat that this is a way to engage support of the community, to really get community people involved with helping others. And that's it. You just can't all be the specialists, the certified people. It's just not going to be possible. It isn't possible. We know that. So I want to thank both of you, James and Father Paul, for taking the time to join us today. There's some other questions that are in chat. And we're now going to go into a breakout room to have a more conversation about it. Other questions are likely to emerge. If it's okay, we'll send them to you. I'll send them to you by an email. If you have a chance to respond to them, we'll post them so people can see the questions, the answers to the questions from you down the road. So I want to thank you both for taking the time to join us today. And thank you both for the good work you're doing. Thank you kindly.
Bob, thank you so much. Thank
Thanks
you
a
all.
lot, Bob. Keep up the great work.
So let's go into a breakout room now and just discuss what you gained from Father Paul and James, and can you see how engaging your community resilience network, either the one you're already involved with or the one you want to form, in their different approaches to building the specific activities involved with building mental wellness and resilience, what key concerns you have, questions, et cetera, especially if you have questions for one of the two speakers, and we'll send that to them. So I'm going to turn it back over to Jesse, and we'll see you all in 10 minutes.
You will find the prompts in the chat, and I will go ahead and open the rooms and try not to close them out prematurely this time.
I guess now is when I should say, post your questions or comments in chat if you would. And Jesse, if anything pops up, let's just have a quick discussion about those.
Bob, we can start with one. There were two questions that came in earlier. Folks, please put questions in the chat. But how do we find, from the first breakout session, actually, a question came in of how do we find harmony between the purpose and values one feels and the pressures that one feels from society, because there's a tension there sometimes that needs to be navigated.
Well, that's a really good question. And if anybody has a response to that, put that in chat. You know, I'll share my idea, but if anybody has a thought about it, put that in chat. And I think it goes back to the control method that I first brought up, and there's different variations of it. Cognitive behavioral therapy is a different version of the control method, if you will, or has part of it. That is, what is it? You know, the only thing you can really control is yourself. Your own character, how you respond to things going on in the world, et cetera. That's the only thing we can ultimately control. So when we look at those pressures that are there, sort of first be aware that you're experiencing the pressures. Just try to be cognizant of what's actually happening and what's going on in your mind, and just say, you know, how do I want to react to that to maintain my own sense of dignity and well-being, and live out my purpose, and rather than just getting engaged at that. It's not easy, and you'll make mistakes, we all do, but the more we can just try to identify what is in my control, and that is ourselves, how we respond, how we think, our character, if you will, and just respond in that way. Anybody else who has any thoughts, please put that in chat. And that, of course, go ahead.
No, I apologize there. And then another question is just recognizing how individualistic US society is. How do we unite people around community resilience when there is such a focus on individuals?
Great question again. And again, if you have thoughts, please post your comments in chat so people can read it. My reaction is to do just what you heard from Father Abernathy. Go out and help people deal with people's specific practical needs, the issues they're dealing with, and that is what creates community. And people realize, oh, you've helped me. And then you can engage them in activities. I'm going to talk about this for just a few seconds at the end, in activities where they help others and they find out how better they feel when they do that. So the more you can actually set aside the ideological, political discussions, et cetera, help people deal with issues that are really present in their lives. That's the best way to really build community. People come together around that. And again, if anybody else has thoughts, please post it. Any last questions? Any other questions?
There's one last question, and then I know that we got to get to your closing out slides, but Just a quick, like, kind of comment question about addressing contentment versus happiness, as joy and assisting with community needs is important. However, a higher level of contentment while acting on hope can also help. And if you have any thoughts there, Bob.
Well, again, anybody else has a thought, please respond. But I think the comment that James made, and I think Father Abernathy, Father Paul, also the same, is to focus on what I call healthy hope. That hope that is wishful thinking. I hear a lot of folks in the climate field, for example, even climate scientists, hope that we'll have some sort of technological breakthrough, or somehow it won't be as bad as it's projected to be, et cetera. And when that doesn't come about, when they have that, then they can actually lead to a serious depression and hopelessness. That healthy hope is just what James did. Create a vision of what you're trying to achieve or what you want. Create a pathway to move towards that, and do what you can, knowing that all you can control is yourself. You can't control the rest of the world. And that is what I think I call healthy hope. And so that's a key, and it really is to focus on what you can control, do your best to help with other issues, but don't be connected to the outcome per se. Just do your best as much as you can and get other people involved. So anybody else has thoughts too, you can share that. We only have a few minutes left, so let me just close up by talking again that what we've been talking about in different forms, you can call it whatever you want, is presencing and purposing. Presencing is to manage those push or those psychobiological drives when you are distressed, even thinking about the climate emergency, realize what's happening in you. You're having these neurochemical reactions going on in you. So try to calm your nervous system and use self-regulation or work or get together with somebody else and practice co-regulation skills, but also purposing. So given the distressing situation, how do I want to find meaning, purpose, and direction in my life? And that's the pull that we want. We're not going to do this resilience pause, but I'm going to quickly go through how to deal with this hopelessness issue. We don't have time to go through it in detail, but as we know, and as many of you, I'm sure I experience it sometimes, the catastrophe is already and will increasingly generate hopelessness. And it's a very powerful emotion that can cause us to harm ourselves, harm others of the world. And it really is something we have to address. So actually, we don't have a time to do that, but I'll just focus here. I'd like you to each experience, sort of think about a time when you helped somebody else or did something positive, helpful for nature, an animal, whatever, without any kind of obligation. And ask yourself, how did you feel when you did that? So think about the last time. Did you open a door for somebody at the grocery store? Did you pick up something for somebody? Did you help somebody in some way? How did you feel afterwards? And if you have a comment, share it in chat. And what happens is when we do those things, those selfless pro-social actions, we feel good, and it actually activates the release of oxytocin into our bloodstream, which makes it feel good, which makes us want to do more good things for other people, which releases more oxytocin, and it's called the oxytocin virtuous cycle. And this is really what we want to engage people in as much as we can, and have you engage in as much as you can, creating that oxytocin virtuous cycle. It's not about being nice. It's not a sense of moralism. It's really an expanded notion of self-interest. But helping others, or helping nature, pets, animals, whatever, helps ourselves as much or more than it helps others. So the more we can do that, the better. And we can call it harvesting healthy hope. And when people do this, it helps people overcome despair and hopelessness and realize, oh, I can control how we respond. How we respond is actually up to us. And Father Paul, as well as James, talked about the three closely related factors. James went into this and specifically that really are key to helping people harvest hope, help them create a vision of a place they want to arrive at or a condition they want to achieve, a sense of the initial steps they can take and sort of the overall approach, and a commitment to work with others to move towards that vision, even when obstacles arise. That's why it's so important to work in these networks, the community networks, neighborhood networks. And then in doing that, you can actually have them craft a purposing safety plan. We talked about that very briefly. I did last week. Where you write down, what is your vision of what you'd like to achieve, a condition you want to achieve? What are some initial steps you can take to move in that direction? What kind of commitment can you make, and who can you join with to overcome those obstacles and help people create their own purposing safety plan? They write down their strengths and their interests and their passions, the core values they want to live by, the actions they're going to take to try to enhance their own well-being, actions they're going to take, these are on the top, to enhance the well-being of others or nature, and thus help myself. And so you can do this. And again, we've done this in many, many workshops. There's different variations of this. I call it a purposing safety plan, but you can use your own. And it's a way to help people realize, oh, here's what I'm trying to achieve. I can do this. We're going to take these steps. And when they achieve those steps, they begin to develop healthy hope. And that is one of the outcomes and one of the major focuses of Father Paul's program that is extremely powerful. They help people who really feel hopeless find hope in life by first getting help themselves, dealing with their physical needs, etc., and then engaging with others in helping others. And it is a very effective program. So I just wanted to share that with you. In closing, if you want CE credits, please remember to complete the American Public Health Association evaluation that should be sent with you to you. Let us know if you're not getting those. Once we pass on to APHA who attended, and then it's up to them to do the rest. So let us know if you're having an issue with that. Homework, practice a purposing resilience skill once a day, and teach it to somebody else. And maybe it is trying to keep that in mind, your mentor or somebody who you can imagine teaching you ways to respond in a wise way, and then sort of think about how can I mimic that, because that's really just you're coming up with. And why don't you create your own purposing safety plan and practice using it a little bit and see what that's like, and see if you can see about using that in your community. And then share what you found what you learned from Father Paul and James about with 2 or 3 other people that you talk with about forming a resilience coordinating network or expanding in a different one, and see how you can engage residents in those kinds of activities and see what happens. And we'll get together next Tuesday, the 2nd, and we're going to focus on the last foundational area, which is to establish ongoing opportunities for people who are really traumatized to heal their traumas, with some two great speakers. So with that, I wish you a good week. Hope this was a helpful session, and hope the next week is a good week for all of you, and we'll see you next Tuesday. Take care, everybody.